All right, good. Then we continue. Very much looking forward now, as we have mentioned several times, we had looked at the morning at nature-based solutions, looking also like how intergovernmental intervention takes place, and now we're looking really like the business case for nature. So very much looking forward. We are a bit behind schedule. So what we will do now is we have a first part with Johannes now. Then we have the online intervention by UNIP-FI, and then we continue with Johannes to conclude, so to say, that part. And yeah, Johannes, stage is yours, and looking very much forward. Mike, please, is over there.
I'll wait a little bit until everybody is ready. Yeah, I guess it's a very long day for you with interesting inputs. But let's connect to where we were yesterday. You remember the double materiality context of businesses having impacts, but then businesses also having dependencies. And with this, we are going to look, okay, how can businesses work with these different concepts of impacts and dependencies to identify also opportunities. So you remember this image here, I guess, from yesterday, although you had a lot of input, I guess, from all the different presentations. But here we had the concept of, or we have the concept of double materiality again. So financial institutions financing different sectors that have impacts and dependencies on nature. And within this frame, is now the challenge to identify opportunities for businesses to work with nature. And on the one hand, there are opportunities in reducing the impacts on nature. So sectors can do a lot of work of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, of course, but reducing also the use of resources, and for example, water and land, identify alternative uses, establish circularity models of how to recycle resources within their production. Of course, also adjusting the product design, and this can generate cost savings, enhance efficiency, and eventually also shifting the business model to a more nature-positive model. So there lie opportunities for the business case for various sectors. So of course that is sectors dependent. For each sector that can be a little bit different. But then we have also business opportunities, of course, for nature-based solutions, where you have also heard about earlier today. And there, for example, flood risk management, the management of water quality, carbon sequestration, of course, sustainable production in terms of natural resources. And yeah, with this perspective, I want to highlight also what are the opportunities that can be identified in this setting of impacts and dependencies, and opportunities where are possible entry points for the business case is, of course, in risk reduction. On the one hand, reducing physical risks, but on the other hand, also reducing transition risks, so possible legal implications, also risks to the license to operate. So companies having high impacts on nature face these transition risks in particular. So for them, it makes sense to look into this impact materiality side. And then, of course, reducing such impacts with circularity, for example, can help cost savings and increase efficiency. And this is also true for nature-based solutions. So working with nature can really enhance also cost savings. And then also, of course, if we establish more sustainable resource use models, we have opportunities to generate revenues also that come from ecotourism, renewable energy, carbon credits, but also sustainable supply chains. And then this can also contribute to reputational and brand value. So there for sure is also this aspect of opportunities. and then also the being compliant with regulations, of course. And overall, also the enhancing the long-term resilience of your business model is eventually also the goal that can be integrated into identifying specific models for integrating nature into your business strategy. Now, on the impact side of the impact materialities, the World Economic Forum has, for example, issued this guidance for particular sectors on nature positive. And this is an example from the automotive sector where I also contributed to. And here it highlights the business opportunity in the context of avoiding and reducing impacts from materials. So establishing circularity models, and compared to other aspects of the value chain, this can make a substantial opportunity, or provide a substantial opportunity for generating also new business opportunities. So if your product needs less original resources, is based more on recycled resources, this can generate also additional business models within the organization, within your company, that are linked to these kind of circularity business strategies. And this is, of course, contributing to reducing the impacts on nature. So one can say this can be, establishing circularity models can be a business opportunity for the production sector and manufacturing sector. Now looking at the other side of the double materiality, on the dependency side, so here coming to the concept of nature-based solutions in the context of green infrastructure. So as you heard earlier today or this morning, of course there are various ways of how nature-based solutions can contribute benefits, and in particular within the infrastructure development, there can be significant synergies between green and gray infrastructure. So strategically integrating this into infrastructure development from the outset can generate significant opportunities. And these lie, of course, in overall ecosystem benefits from that particular area, flood mitigation risk or mitigating flood risks, also water security. I'm sure you're very familiar with this. And here we have that case study that I mentioned earlier, also yesterday, about New York City, where they looked into the option of implementing nature-based solutions within their infrastructure strategy, because the excessive rainwater with increasing rainwater events is actually exceeding the capacity of the water drainage system. And then the question was, okay, do we increase the infrastructure of the drainage system, or do we integrate nature-based solutions that can take up the rainwater, infiltrate it into the ground, and actually preventing of too much rainwater entering into the drainage system. And the overall target of that strategy was that about 10% of stormwater that was coming down should be taken up by green infrastructure by implementing these measures. So you can see that, of course, it's not just opening the concrete, but it's also to actually properly install ground infiltration, which can effectively take up and absorb the rainwater. But in the end, it looks like smaller green gardens along the streets. And overall, it was found that this option generates benefits in terms of avoided costs in terms of 1.5 billion US dollars for that green infrastructure strategy in New York. And in addition to this, just beyond the avoided cost for expanding the drainage system, and saving on that. Of course, you get also benefits from these small ecosystems within the city, and in terms of CO2 uptake, air quality that is improved. Also, the property value is going up, and also, yeah, you could see that the well-being of the people has been benefiting also from these green areas. And these benefits come on top of these 1.5 billion and is in the range of 400 million US dollars over the period of 20 years. So you might not have a direct revenue stream from this coming in, but it helps you on the cost saving side. So there are different perspectives on where the economic benefit lies of these nature-based solutions. And it's not always that there is a cash flow related to it, but oftentimes it's actually also a cost-saving component. And actually, as this green infrastructure was implemented, the overall drainage of the rainwater was reduced by 20%. So actually, it was much more effective than was previously aimed for. But of course, it has also some limits that when really heavy rainfalls come down, also the green areas cannot take up all the water. So you get also in extreme events, also events where not all the water can be taken up. But overall, one can really say, okay, with gray infrastructure, you do a one-time investment, and then it's quite static, and it degrades over time. You have to invest into maintenance. Of course, that is also true for green-gray infrastructure. You also have to maintain it. But because of all the multiple benefits and working with nature and synergy, the overall benefits seem to exceed that of the gray infrastructure.
Johannes, maybe very brief comment, because I think this is very important what you just said, like that we should not, I think, see it like as a silver bullet, like that it can solve everything, but especially like the limited capacity of what a nature-based solution or like an adaptation measure is that I can do. Just recently there was an example in Germany, like where there's a new area, like I think in the western part of Germany, new build, like everything was labeled also like with prices, like it's green, it's adapted to nature, etc. It's sort of like avoid a flood, but then there was a very strong heavy rainfall, and the streets were flooded again. So the question, people asking, so does it really make sense? But like as you just said, like there are some events which also like these the nature-based solutions that I cannot cope with, right? This is like what we have also to be clear about, I think.
Yeah, it's important to communicate this also from the very beginning, from the outset, and also that ecosystems, as they are increasingly under stress from extreme events themselves, their capacity is also negatively impacted. So overall, that even makes the stronger case for mitigation and acting early and reducing these pressures. But in the end, one can also say there have been studies on disaster risk reduction measures with ecosystem-based adaptation, and in most cases, like more than 60% of cases, they were more effective than the built infrastructure. So there are also studies that systematically looked into ecosystem-based adaptation measures because the natural systems, the natural ecosystems can also regenerate after the extreme event. So after the extreme event with the gray infrastructure, you need to maybe invest again and rebuild after an extreme event. And with nature-based solutions like mangrove ecosystems, for example, they can regenerate also themselves, and maybe then the cost benefit lies also there after the extreme event. But of course, it's very context specific as well. Another initiative is also an example from California, where the Napa River creek was being restored. And some of the parts of the stream were heavily built in and like left and to the right were concrete and also some housing, and of course very prone to flood events. And by restoring that riverbed, actually the multiple benefits could be observed. So on the one hand, the flood damage could be reduced, and also benefits for local people could be enhanced. So the access for local recreation, for example, but also the insurance premiums went down, so that actually people could get insurance again against flood events in this area, because the restored riverbed would allow the river to not have as much damaging effect as it was previously the case. We can see these kind of effects also in Europe. So there have been examples at the Elbe River and also the Danube River, where such restoration activities have led to being like that insurance companies are being able to offer insurance against, because it has been proven that with the restoration activities, actually the flood damage is going down. And here in the Napa Valley, the example was so successful that they actually expand from this small example. It's in that part here is this example where they restored, and then now they expanded the restoration activities across a large part of the river basin. And so this shows that an example of a kind of like a pilot phase or an example of a river restoration program in a particular location, if it's done well, can be also the initial or the initiation for an larger intervention than at catchment scale. What we generally face, although, is that it's called the tragedy of the horizon. Mark Carney called it in the context of climate change also, that if we do take actions now, some of the benefits we see only later. And that's also the case for nature, investing into nature-based solutions. Some of them, those benefits can be generated quite quickly. So for example, also in New York, that was a rather successful case showing within a typical lifespan of infrastructure development, you would see also the returns. But for example, when it comes to using natural resources, like here in the case just depicted for the use of forests, the short-term benefits of harvesting the forests often exceed in the short term the benefits of conservation. So then, of course, that's a driver for business models that are more short-term extractive. And the business model that are more long-term for conservation, those are have a harder and difficult time to be scaled and integrated. And so the challenge here is how to bring these, how to turn this around, so that you bring basically the benefits, the long-term benefits of nature also to the forefront, and enable investments into nature-based solutions. And here, often what we see is kind of like the need for a policy mix of different instruments coming in that enable us. So, for example, the carbon pricing is such a policy instrument that would enable to make the conserved forest, the standing forest, already in a more attractive investment strategy at current times. And overall, what we see then when identifying a business case for nature, it's always the question also, is it like, for whom is it a business case? Like, who is actually benefiting from that business case? Is it for the local people that have maybe reduced insurance premiums? Or is it for an external investor that wants to have a return for investment? Or is it for some particular company that is having a benefit from using an ecosystem service? So when talking about the business case, it's always the question about, okay, who are the stakeholders that are being involved? Who receive the benefits from the ecosystem services? Who are stewards of those ecosystem services and those ecosystems that need to be supported or also compensated for their actions to maintain the ecosystems? or who are polluters and degraders that might harm that ecosystem and should maybe be involved in providing payments as as a kind of like a charge, or charging them for polluting that ecosystem, which then can contribute back to measures to maintain it. And when identifying a business case like this, it's quite important to take a strategic perspective on that particular case. For whom is it a business case? Who are the beneficiaries? Who are the stewards? Who are the polluters or degraders? And in this discussion, as we have seen also the case for New York, okay, one particular ecosystem service might be in particular focus, but one has to be also aware that there are multiple ecosystem services, and the whole bundle of it should be also taken into account. And often when, for example, looking at this case in the Napa River, it's a whole catchment level which needs to involve multiple stakeholders. So actually, to make that work, that restoration activity, collective action is needed from different stakeholders in that catchment. And again here, a policy mix of instruments, or a mix of instruments, of policy instruments and economic instruments is needed to make this work and last. And in order to assess this kind of situation then, where you can identify where lies the business case here, we have developed a tool. It's called Acting on Ecosystem Service Opportunities, which helps to identify who are the stewards, who are the beneficiaries, who are the polluters, and then identify tools and ways of reconciling those different perspectives. And this is just an overview of different options that you have. So one can have multiple instruments that can be chosen. So for example, a user fee, a surcharge, of course payments for ecosystem services as carbon payments, certain direct payments as compensations. But then on the other hand, one can also think of a tax that is addressing the polluters. And each of these instruments can either benefit the stewards that are earning, or the beneficiaries, or actually be targeted at the polluters. And others might be innovative instruments, such as certain certification schemes. And there is a whole range of instruments, policy instruments, but also economic instruments that can enable and facilitate of these different stakeholders coming together and to identify opportunities. Where is here the case to investing into nature-based solutions? Now, linking this to the finance mechanisms, I think we can take this as the last slide before 4 o'clock, because that could then be the link to the next opportunity or next presentation. The World Economic Forum recently also published a report highlighting different finance mechanisms that can enable these kind of investment cases for nature-based solutions. And for example, sustainability-linked bonds, different bond schemes for different thematic areas. Also sustainability-linked loans, meaning that investments and loans come with a certain conditionality of certain activities that should be implemented by those that receive the bonds, the payments from the bonds, or that receive the loans. And so this can be, for example, linked to conservation targets, but also sustainable development targets in more general, which come as a whole package. And then maybe one part is focusing more on climate benefits, other parts are focusing on nature benefits, and then certain aspects ideally link and create synergies. And then, of course, there are also impact funds that target particular ecosystems, particular topics. Then we have the whole topic of environmental credits, so ranging from carbon credits to water credits and biodiversity credits. Also, debt for nature swap has been quite instrumental. The estimation is that around $5 billion of debt for nature swaps have been implemented so far. And yeah, the basic payment for ecosystem services schemes, you can see the range of their overall estimated transactions. Actually, payments for ecosystem services seem, is rather at the lower end because there are so many small-scale projects. But of course, they can be highly effective because they are very targeted to particular locations. Whereas one can think, for example, of these bonds and loans and impact funds, they also need to be channeled into specific activities at local level. So it's not, maybe they give an overview of, okay, this is here the overall sum and the transaction, which seems to be very large or compared to payments for ecosystem services. But then actually it matters a lot in what kind of activities are they invested, and they also need to reach the local scale and the local level in particular projects. So the challenge is how to break that down to the particular context of where they are implemented. And again, here it helps to identify also, what is the issue, what are the different stakeholders that are involved, what activities are degrading, where lie the benefits for ecosystem services when implementing such financing schemes. Yes.
The schemes biodiversity credit. Do you have any idea of the size of the biodiversity credit market?
Yes, it's around 8 million so far.
8 million.
Yes.
Because there's so much hoop-brouhaha about it that you think it's like $1 billion business, but I mean, my numbers were 80, slightly under 80, but 8 is even less.
Yeah. So yes, of course it depends a bit on how you define it, because some of the forest projects linked to carbon credits could be also said like, there is a link to biodiversity included as well. But so far it's usually difficult to say what is a biodiversity credit that's really a standalone biodiversity credit, that only, maybe that's more than, and the discussion around the definition is that maybe then that's also a donation. Like if you pay for conservation as such, you can also say like, okay, that's a donation. Why do you need to call it a credit? So usually with a credit, the goal is that you can have a secondary market, and then you can trade the credits on the secondary market, and that's tricky to see how this is being implemented for biodiversity, because you still need to keep track of the particular impact of that credit.
Yeah, and maybe just to complement, we have tomorrow morning in the morning session someone who is actually actively working in the biodiversity credit market. So looking very much forward also what he shares, whether he confirms the 8 million or or the 80 or are we lying somewhere else exactly?
There's some error margin to the 8 million.
Thank you. I maybe have one comment and one question. The comment is, it seems to me that biodiversity and adaptation to the climate are very close in terms of, and very different from mitigation, where, I mean, you can see immediate results, you can bring in the private sector because you can have some profitable projects. And it's a very global subject versus what we have in the case of adaptation and biodiversity. It's very local, a lot of small actors.
Yes.
It's at the same time global and local, and you have to bring between it. There are also those who are benefiting are not those who are investing, and it's very difficult to find a common, interest with different stakeholders.
Yes.
So it's very demanding for financial institutions. I think that the capacity that it's like we bring the banks to for the mitigation, under the mitigation in a position in when they can start to to embrace and to engage lots with some clarity, and now we ask them for adaptation and biodiversity, and we see that in our case, in the IDFC case, our engagement, financial engagement in biodiversity and adaptation is very similar in terms of the volume, the finance volume, and it requires a lot of capacity, lots of knowledge, lots of research, and really for small amount, which is really not very good for the banks. So the gap is very high. I mean, the bar to reach to have very good projects, and still even the best in class are struggling to reach that. How do you see the turning point, or what we can do how we can help our banks, our colleagues, our members to maybe to overcome this very high barrier? I mean, the energy barrier is quite high. We see that we think that we reach something, but we go behind very fast. We see, for example, in terms of volume, that we increase for 1 or 2 years, but we say that okay, now we reach some trigger, so we can go ahead, but soon we come back to the early stage of engagement. And how do you see the banks, or for the public banks? And one thing which is important also is the role of the public bank or the public money in adaptation and biodiversity is very high. I mean, this is more the subject of the public institutions than mitigation, for example. How do you see in this not very positive landscape I describe some bubbles of optimism that on which we can build something better?
I think it's a very, like you asked the tricky question that everybody tries to solve. But I think that one way is of integrating kind of like this notion of mainstreaming biodiversity in nature and this perspective, for example, from the outset into infrastructure planning, into different land use sectors or different business sectors, so that it's becoming an integral part of planning processes, for example, and thereby also by investment strategies. So for example, if you do standard environmental impact assessments for projects, maybe those should be required to have a component on, okay, what is the adaptation component here, and where is the room for nature-based adaptation as part of an mitigation strategy, or like mitigation in the sense of implementing a project and a development on the ground. What kind of activities and measures are being taken to mitigate impacts, and also to enhance the resilience of the project. And I think we need to get to this mainstreaming level, so thinking not only, oh, we are doing an adaptation project here. No, we are doing an infrastructure development, as we do every day, as we move forward. And with every infrastructure development project, this has to be a component that is an integral part of looking at the different options of how this infrastructure can be developed. So I think in the end, we need to get to these integrative approaches.
I think it's really true, but I can give you an example. What happened to? It's a real example. What happened to us a few years ago? We have a project with one bank in one country, and the clients of the bank present us a project on biodiversity. It was a wetland near a beach, and we accepted to finance the fact that they would like to see something very nice. On the paper, it was very nice. Somebody, his usual civil engineer company, who makes something very nice, but really completely destroyed the things. Because even if you have a banker or clients willing to do,
recording in progress,
and a bank willing to finance, if you don't have the people on the land, because it was part of the development of the project, as you say, it was a piece of something additional to the normal projects. and the clients accepted to finance to take a loan for financing this layer of good things on biodiversity, but there was no expertise on the field to do the job, and this is also something that we are because we don't have good projects coming. Also, there is also the problem of not only the willingness of the bank or the clients, but also the capacity of those who are doing the project.
Thank you.